So welcome. I think we're live. Welcome, and thank you for your patience to the Center of Excellence second conference on equity from the start and our first plenary for the conference. My name is Lisa Gordon. I'm the Director of Training and Technical Assistance and Community Outreach with the Children's Equity Project out of Arizona State University, and I'm also a TA advisor with the COE. In 2020, the COE launched a 5-part webinar series. Many of you may have attended. It was entitled Equity. How did we get here? Equity in infant and early childhood mental health. How do we get here? It examined the historical and structural roots of races and race and other forms of bias and resulting disparities on the early care and education experiences of children and families from Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian American, and Pacific Islander communities, those communities that have been historically and contemporarily marginalized. It identified ways that we can strengthen infant and early childhood mental health consultation practices to really address bias and reduce disparities to create environments where all children can thrive. So in this first plenary session, we are bringing together panelists, some who participated in the webinar series, and all who are really doing the work of IECMHC to share their perspectives, to share their stories and their insights on equity in infant and early childhood mental health consultation from their own personal lived experiences and work with providers, children, and families from communities that have been historically and contemporarily marginalized. So we come together to engage in dialogue and reflect on lessons learned since 2020, share what's working in advancing the work of equity in infant and early childhood mental health consultation, and perspectives on what we can do to hold hope, holding hope for providers, for children and families, as well as ourselves. So welcome, panelists. Welcome, panelists. We're thrilled to have each of you here with us today. I was going to do introductions, but I'm going to ask if you all can do introductions as you begin to share, just from a time perspective. That would help us to keep moving along. But before we get into the conversation, I'd like to set the conversation with setting the stage, if you will, for our dialogue today. So we first take a look back to 2020 and the years that followed shortly thereafter in the context of our nation. It was a time when our nation experienced a great period of racial and civil unrest, one that we didn't feel that we would be experiencing again, right? We had the COVID health pandemic that resulted in 1.1 million deaths across the country, and that disproportionately impacted Black, Indigenous, and Latinx communities who experienced the greatest number of hospitalizations and fatalities. The murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor at the hands of police officers led to our nation's largest cross-racial, cross-cultural, and cross-generational protests in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. And the protests were both in reaction to those murders, as well as an expression of the frustration over the longstanding systemic issues. And we also experienced the unrest that followed with the 2020 presidential elections, the increase in anti-Black and anti-Asian sentiment and hate crimes, the threat to DACA, zero tolerance policies, and child separations at the border, and the struggle of more than 570 federally recognized American Indian and Alaska Native tribes and communities in the United States that are fighting to be seen and heard. And of course, the mass shootings that have taken the lives of countless innocent victims, including our children in our nation's schools. And even right now, for all of us, witnessing the global level of trauma in this time as we face and witness the violence in Ukraine, Israel, and Gaza. These issues, individually and collectively, have really surfaced long-standing issues of historical and systemic and structural racism and inequities that have existed, like we said in our 5-part webinar series, since the founding of our nation. But the evidence is clear. The evidence is clear that daily experiences of racial discrimination, microaggressions harm the psychological and physical well-being of Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian American, and Pacific Islander, and other people of color. And in 2021, in a historic move, the CDC declared racism a public issue. So given all this combination of events I just shared, it's not a surprise that we know that the number of children with mental health concerns has more than doubled since the COVID pandemic and through this period of time that we just discussed. So I want to really open it up right now to you, our panelists, to be able to think back and ask you the question, what have we learned since 2020 when we think about the issues of equity in infant and early childhood mental health consultation? And Christina, I'd love to start with you if you can share your perspectives, and then we'll move to the other panelists. Christina?
Thank you, Lisa. And thank you for inviting me to this panel. I'm Christina Shea. I am the Chief Clinical Officer at Richmond Area Multi-Services. It's a mental health program in San Francisco, California. And I started at RAMS in 1999 as the start of the mental health consultation in the preschool. And it's interesting that I am being asked to be the first panelist speaker because this is unusual for us. And I'm wearing a Chinese outfit with my background of Pacific Islander painting behind me, representing the communities that I'm representing, which is extremely diverse. I can speak more to, I am Chinese, born and raised in Hong Kong, came to United States when I was 15 years old, educated and worked and grew up in San Francisco Bay Area. And so I can speak more to who I am, what I know, and the community our program work for. And then I can also speak to other Asian immigrants and Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders through my other work within RAMS. I think in 2020, actually in the beginning of 2020, in January, or even at the end of 2019, when COVID started in China, San Francisco, Chinatown was already impacted. The tourism dropped tremendously because, we are dangerous. So in the beginning, my thought was, oh my God, San Francisco, Chinatown is the most densely populated community, and we're going to have an outbreak. Almost 4 years later, there wasn't a single outbreak in San Francisco, Chinatown. However, the side effect is our communities had been locked up for 2-3 years, and the kids had been severely impacted because they live in small quarters. They were not allowed to go outside. Schools were closed. And even when the playgrounds were open, the parents were not comfortable to let the kids play outside because they don't want the kids to be sick and bring back to the grandparents. And so, and with anti-Asian, anti-Black, anti-anything, anti-non-whites racism has always been in the United States and worldwide. So it just rekindle and resurface what was not talked about to be able to talk about our rights. And we were targeted. There were more community violence against our community and against all community, actually. People are just acting more violent. So the seniors do not want to go out and the kids were not allowed to go out. So in the preschool setting, in the beginning, we pivot to Zoom consultation, and that didn't work very well because, kids just don't look at the screen. The kids wants to play. What we have, so now moving forward, we are back in school, and what worked is we need to be in person, and we need to be in person and work with the kids. So the kids basically have delayed socially for a couple of years because they haven't played and seen any other people other than the immediate family. So working with the kids, allowing more self-expression work, and also having the kids get to know other people in the neighborhood, other people outside the neighborhood, bringing more activities together so that they get to know other racial, ethnic neighborhood kids. When they become friends, then the parents become friends, because at this point, the adults are afraid of anybody other than the immediate family. So bringing the kids together so that they can bring the parents together to get to know each other, that works. And introducing them to celebrate and embrace, not tolerate. I don't like tolerate. They need to embrace each other's culture, language, look, expression of self. I have talked about like expression of self with Asian. Part of our protective factor is unseen and unheard, because many of the immigrants and refugees or previous refugees came from war-torn country and communist country, that they have learned and trained that if they are unseen and unheard, they would be safe. The ones who speak up will be arrested. So the unseen and unheard, it's what we learn, that this is our protective factor to protect us and teach our children. That's how you to be safe. You study hard, don't speak up, and just listen and don't act. So in preschool, our communities are not the ones who get labeled as being suspended or expelled, because we are not seen and not heard. And we've seen kids that have more selective mutism and social anxiety as a result. So what we do is to help them to come out, to express themselves, which is different than what the family and over generations that our tradition has taught us. Am I time? I can.
No, you're fine,
Christina.
Yeah, no, I love that. And so appreciate you sharing that perspective. And within understanding that experiences of, these issues of equity look different, right? Within various communities. They manifest in different ways. Cultural connections bring about different meaning to interactions and relationships, and historical experiences and bring us to different places of understanding. So I so appreciate that piece about that, silence as that protective factor, and how to, what you're doing to try to help children and families and understanding to find voice and to be able to use their voice to be able to advocate and speak for themselves. So that's beautiful. No, I really so appreciate that. I'd love to hear San Juanita, if you can speak and share a little bit from your perspective of lessons learned in this period of time.
Yes, thank you, Lisa. Good morning to everybody, or good afternoon, depending where you're at. Thank you so much to the Center of Excellence and to everyone for this honor and invitation of being here today. And my name is Juanita Guerra. I am a licensed professional counselor in South Texas. I'm in Laredo, Texas, which is on the border to Mexico. I work for SCAN, which is a nonprofit organization here in Laredo and the surrounding areas that focuses on the overall well-being of our community, especially focused on mental health. And I work for a launch grant. So our program is called Border Project Launch. And so my work is focused on infant and early childhood mental health consultation. I have not been doing the work as long as Christina, nowhere near that. But in my experience, in terms of, what have we learned, there's a lot of commonalities here between what Christina said and what I have observed in our community, which is predominantly Hispanic, predominantly of Mexican descent. And so, which is the population that we serve. And, some of the commonalities there is definitely the fear that Christina spoke about in terms of, for all these years, during COVID and post-COVID, the fear of just going out and, interacting. Schools were shut down for a little while in terms of the children went virtual for over a year, pretty much since they came back from spring break in 2020. It went, it was everything was in lockdown, and then everything went back to it went to virtual mode, and then that continued for another school year. So we too are experiencing a lot of the delays that Christina spoke about in terms of, just seeing a lot of disparities there with delays in speech and communication and, socializing with others. What Christina touched on about, if we bring the kids together, we bring the parents together, and then you've got a community who hopefully is, supporting each other and sharing resources and ideas. And so that's what we're starting to see just now. But all of those setbacks are very, very prevalent here in South Texas. And so, and you mentioned it at the beginning, something that deeply impacted our community was definitely the crisis at the border, which continues. You see it in the news. And so the great numbers of folks trying to immigrate into the United States, and the crisis at the border, separation of families, children being separated from their parents, and in many cases even misplaced or displaced. So a lot of traumatic experiences being suffered. And so, we as a community have been trying our best to help each other and to be resilient despite those circumstances. And so we see a lot of inequities in that sense, help coming to the border. One of the main things here is, of course, health. Here on the border, we have significant numbers when it comes to levels of obesity and diabetes, not to mention how many deaths we experienced due to COVID. And so it's this ongoing pandemic, really, for us. COVID was one thing, but, the health concerns and the lack of resources, that our people are able to access. Another thing there is also, lack of information and education. And so that's part of our work with our nonprofit and our organization, is really educating the community on, what is available, what is out there, what is accessible, what are their options to be able to close that gap in terms of folks, suffering, and then, resources. So, historically, of course, that's something that we've seen with the Hispanic community, the Latinx community, is that, lack of resources coming to our areas, especially here on the border. And so, I mean, I will have to say though, and I have to give credit, is that we have come a long way in the last 20 years. You know, for example, here in our hometown of Laredo, you know, just the number of mental health professionals, you know, that where even 10 years ago, we wouldn't see that in terms of getting folks the mental health services that they need and deserve. You know, again, raising awareness and lowering, it's a big part here, and especially when you're working with Hispanics and you know, folks of Mexican descent, is lowering the stigma of getting help, right? Of using the resources that are there. So that has definitely improved. It's still a challenge, though. It's still a challenge, especially when so many other things are priorities, right? I spoke about folks with serious health issues. It's incredible just in the last, you know, again, 15 or so years, how many dialysis clinics have popped out in our hometown. I mean, I don't recall that when I was a kid growing up here. And so that goes to show, you know, how you know, sick our community is, you know, and folks depending on these services. And so, but we have come a long way in terms of resources for providers and young children and families. And, you know, for example, our program, our project launch. And so being able to provide, you know, just having infant and early childhood mental health consultation services in our community is such a big deal to be able to close the gaps of some of these disparities that we have seen, you know, all of our lives in our community. And so in that sense, you know, I feel, you know, optimistic that things will get better. Everything, like anything else, everything is, you know, this too shall pass kind of thing. But yeah, it's just, you know, again, echoing a lot of what Christina said in terms of what have we learned from 2020 and post, you know, the tri-pandemic is definitely that there's still a lot of work to be done. We've done a lot of work. We've come a long way, but there's still a lot of work to be done. There's a lot more resources that are needed. There's a lot more need for empowering folks and raising their voices to fight and to demand what they need, and to, you know, be able to improve our communities in terms of, you know, overall health, mental health, physical health, but especially for our children, because wow, you know, this post-pandemic era or generation of children, it's something else. It's something else. I've heard it from providers that we work with, such as teachers and school counselors, of course, from parents. You know, folks just ask the question, what happened? Because we are seeing so many of these delays. And well, it goes back to, again, you know, the isolation, you know, missing milestones, just, you know, basic human connection. And so we're seeing all of that. And the fear remains. The fear remains, even though, you know, everything's open and most of us are vaccinated. But the fear remains in terms of, you know, folks getting sick or loss of life, loss of jobs, loss of everything that we saw during 2020 and a big chunk of 2021. So yeah, we just continue the work and you know, be very mindful, very aware of where the disparities remain, right? So that we can continue working for that and change some policies, you know, contact your local leaders and, you know, change things up, shake things up to be able to make an impact that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, San Juanita, thank you so much, and for speaking to, you know, the realities of the tri-pandemic, because it really was a tri-pandemic, and it's an ongoing. These issues, like you say, have not stopped, right? They didn't just crop up either. They really are the long-standing issues of inequities in our systems with the structural and historical system of racism and how that has created the barriers to health. to access to resources and all of these things. So I loved the part that you talked about in terms of empowering voice and really thinking about, educating the community about where resources are. So thank you so much for elevating that. Dawn, I want to hear from you as well in terms of what lessons learned that you're thinking about or that you've experienced within the community that you're working with.
Thank you, everyone. I'm Dawn Yazzie, and my clans are Ye'idina et Hachini. I'm born for Kiani. Sonat Lehepa Wetnishle. My family line, my ancestors are survivors of the Huelte long walk that Navajos, majority of Navajos had to endure under the U.S. government, under the cavalry in 1864. And we were imprisoned in internment camps for about 5 years. We came back to the Navajo Nation between the four sacred mountains in 1868. So just there in that lies a lot of multi-generational trauma and resilience going to pair, because if it was only trauma, I would not be here. The Navajo people would not be here. We're still here in the way that we show up, whether we are struggling with health issues, substance misuse, whether we're not struggling, whether we're thriving, we're still here. And I did see that breadth and span of when I was doing consultation on the Navajo Nation. I recently finished doing some consultation on Navajo Nation in this past June. I am doing private work with consultation nearby Navajo Nation as well still. But what I did notice back in, thinking about 2020, 2021, so, setting that stage of, we were not citizens until the 1920s, and, even though we've always been here. So you think about structures and systems that set up things, and they don't change much, once it's set and it moves forward, especially if it's a big system of laws and policies. But just echoing what Christina and Juanita shared about, a lot of fear. A lot of childcare centers didn't reopen well after 2021 till maybe early 2022. Some, only think one was able to open in 2021 in the fall, and it was just a lot of fear. But being that I had relationships with these centers and we were doing virtual meetings, they still were not allowing visitors, but they allowed and made space for the early childhood support staff from the Arizona First Things First initiatives to come in virtually and do trainings about the health stuff, sanitizing, and all of the mask wearing and all of that. And then they also allowed mental health consultants to come in as well through the Smart Support program in Arizona, the early childhood mental health consultation program. And one thing that I had noticed too is, yes, there were a lot of losses, a lot of deaths, but, and Navajo Nation made national news in May of 2020 of being like the highest infectious rate in the country for quite a while. The other part too that, what that was highlighted, our leadership at that time, highlighted that, over 30% of our homes didn't have running water and electricity. And, that speaks to that, again, the systems that are there. And to this day, we still have a lot of homes and families who don't have those services yet. So in a way, yes, the endemics, the existing endemics, kind of what Juanita spoke to, of health issues, disparities, inequities in access to things, the endemic was just amplified. And, so some programs and systems on Navajo Nation, their challenges were amplified, or their strengths were amplified. So one of the two came out, and sometimes both came up for some programs and some families. And the other thing I also noticed was that I had to really leverage existing relationships as a consultant. I remember I had a center where they would not allow anyone on campus other than existing staff and children, and the parents couldn't even come on campus. But they allowed us to do virtual visits, and I had a really good relationship with the director, and so I leveraged that relationship. And I had a whole school year of preschool of 100% new staff turnover, but I knew the director, and she allowed and made space and supported her staff to, receive training. What is early childhood? What is brain development? Like, what is social and emotional development? All of the basics of what we start with. What is trauma? Trauma-informed care, birth to 3, 3 to 4 and 5 years old. So that leveraging of the relationship allowed me to support a teacher virtually the whole time. I never met them in person. I never even actually saw them. They never turned on their Zoom screen, but I made sure that they could see me. And, I created a space to listen to them and hold them. And it was really interesting because one of the things that the teacher had said at the end of the school year with one little student that they had a lot of concerns with, they had said that by the end of the school year, they had changed their perspective of this child. They had understood the child better, and they had held more patience and time for the child to do what they needed to do to regulate themselves, and they became more of a support for this child. So, just leveraging relationships was a big key, existing relationships, and I was lucky to have that at that center. But one thing I also noticed as well is that the opportunity to that more families and teachers and directors did on Navajo Nation is they lean towards something that maybe they didn't lean towards before, and that was Navajo traditional practices and teachings. That was another thing that I had noticed as well. So I'll stop there and let others share too.
Thank you, Dawn. Yeah, the leveraging of relationships. I love that. And I think many of us felt that where we could lean into that as a source of strength and connection, and then leaning toward cultural practices and beliefs and ways of knowing and being, just so important in terms of being able to support the health and well-being of providers and children and families. So love that sharing, Dawn. So thank you so much. Angela, would love to hear from you as well as lessons learned from your experience.
Great, thank you. So I'll start with an introduction to myself. My name is Angela Keys. I'm an associate professor of psychiatry at Tulane School of Medicine in New Orleans, and I co-direct a statewide infant and early childhood mental health consultation program that has started in 2007. So we are rounding out our 16th year, if I'm doing my math correctly. But I will say, in all the years that I've done this work, 2020 began probably the most challenging period of time for us as a program. We had lots of similar experiences to what the other panelists have shared. And, everyone said things that resonated so strongly with me because it's been our experience as well with, the fear that came along with that time of COVID and the racial reckoning. African Americans in general were really scared. And the things I think that everyone has talked about, the things that we thought had been resolved to some degree really did reemerge very clearly and explicitly in a way that I did not think I would experience in my lifetime, with fear for my children who are Black males, fear for their safety. And so so many other providers share that fear. We had children who were home and not having opportunities to practice those skills. So we're, those social skills. So we're seeing lots of delays right now as well. We're also seeing teacher retention issues and lots of turnover and burnout and stress. But the thing that is so interesting to me, and despite all of the challenges that we're seeing with our children, teachers are not getting the support that they need. I think that's what we have learned in some of this, is that it has laid bare many of the inequities that exist in the system, not only for children and parents, but for teachers. In Louisiana, a report was just issued that showed that early childhood workers are 60%. The poverty rate for that group is 60% higher than for employees in any other sector. So we have these very vulnerable children. We know how important the first 5 years of life are, which means we know how important our early childhood providers are in providing a foundation for children that supports their successful growth and development, yet they are overrepresented in poverty. We also see that in Louisiana, at least, the median wage for teachers went down 2% in 2019 from 2017. So their wages are not getting better and higher, they're actually getting worse. So we have, what are we doing to support these teachers? How are we influencing and impacting policy that helps to support these teachers? Many of whom are also parents who have children in childcare programs. So we're seeing all of these things happen, and the lack of support that is being given. And what can we do as mental health consultants and as citizens to really impact change? One of the things that we noticed during the pandemic, we know lots of early childhood programs closed, but many remained open to care for the children of what were called essential workers. But early childhood providers are also essential workers. They drive the economy, because if people didn't have care for their children, there would be no ability to work or look for work or train for work or go to school. So our early childhood providers are essential workers who are grossly underpaid and underappreciated. And they operated and kept children, took care of children when many of us were in our homes and trying to work with them virtually, as Dawn shared, the best that we could. So when they did open, we had a no visitor policy, right? Sometimes they would let the consultant in if they couldn't do it virtually, but children, at least in my state, were basically, they had carpool. So the teachers would ferry the children from the parents' vehicles into their classrooms, which cut off the lines of communication, which impacted the ability to partner with parents to learn about how children were, whether they were not feeling well, if they had a rough night the night before, when's the last time he or she ate, had a diaper change, teething, all the things, especially for our nonverbal babies, that a parent would typically share with the teacher if allowed into the building. So we see that impact on the parent-teacher relationship, which through parallel process impacts the teacher-child relationship. And so, what we are learning is the importance of maintaining those relationships, keeping those lines of communication open, supporting our essential workers, and through consultation. And I feel like when we employ and embody the consultative stance, that we are wondering instead of knowing, that we are understanding another subjective experience, that we are utilizing the diversity-informed tenets for work with infants, children, and families, and we are honoring family structures and supporting language, home language, and honoring home language. When we are doing that self-reflection and that really thinking about, what is it that I believe? Where are my implicit biases? What stereotypes do I hold about other people that can impact how I work with a teacher or a child or a family, is super important to do. And I think if there is a a blessing, if there is a blessing to the tri-pandemic, is this heightened awareness and realization of the need to do better and to do more.
Yeah. Wow, Angela, thank you. Totally. You had so many points that you raised just in terms of the continued workforce issues that are real within early childhood, right? Lack of pay and lack of pay parity. But then again, just who are the essential workers during the period of COVID, right? And the fact that many of our providers are living in communities that are historically and contemporarily marginalized, are fearing, like you said, Angela, their children, their sons walking out the door for fear, or driving while Black, right? The anti-Black, anti-Asian sentiments that our providers, like you had shared, Christina, are feeling, right? So that piece of it, and really maintaining those relationships, right? And understanding that and using that consultative stance to be able to lean in, right? And the issues are different. So a lot of times we talk about expulsions and suspensions, but like you said, Christina and Angela and Sen Juanita and Dawn, the lived experiences differ, but the inequities and the disparities remain. And we're reliving. The tri-pandemic was a relive of these issues. It wasn't something new. Certainly the health pandemic and COVID was new for us, but the realities of where this nation is and the historical and structural systems of systemic racism are real and pervasive. So my question to all of you, and I'm going to start with you, Angela, too, in these few minutes before we move to a final question that we'd love to ask you, and also to you all and participants, we also want to engage you in a final conversation question that we have. But before we do, what is working? Some of you have elevated some things that are working, but I wanted just to give another round of any pieces of that you'd love to pull out. We talked about leveraging relationships. We talked about the workforce and issues and realizing the realities of our providers for where they stand in terms of their own lived experiences. We've talked about quite a few of these pieces, leveraging that stigma of getting support. So what else is working that we may not have elevated in the conversation? We'll start with you, Angela, and then we'll ask others to join in too.
I think one of the things that's working is we are finding new and creative ways to support teachers through virtual options now that we have. You know, we all spend a lot of time on Zoom, and technology is becoming more common and more familiar. And so we're able to reach providers in a way that we had not been able to before, especially providers in more rural areas or underserved areas, or when we have capacity issues in our program. We are learning how to really work creatively in supporting those individuals. And I think what's working is we are beginning to have these conversations, as we've had this morning, this afternoon, depending on where you are, that because of that heightened awareness, we're able to talk more openly and directly about the inequities that we see, about the need for greater support, and we're able to become better advocates and to really work, whether it's attending a city council meeting or a committee meeting in your state legislature, or writing to one of your legislators. We can make our voices heard, and we can be more intentional about supporting and advocating for more folks. And when I also say, this is part of what I think I've learned, it kind of goes back, is it's important for us to understand the need to open pathways that allow for more diversity in our mental health consultation workforce, so that providers can be served by folks who share some some identity with them. And we need more referral sources. So we need more folks in general in the field of mental health, because we have long waiting lists for things like autism referrals or speech therapy. And so it's just highlighting the need. And when you acknowledge and understand the need, then you can do something about it.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Angela. Juanita, is there anything you'd like to add to that in terms of what's working?
Yes, thank you. You know, again, a lot of what Angela said in terms of, you know, again, empowering. I think what's really working, at least in my community that I can speak to, is again, slowly, but we're getting there. More resources are coming to our area. Like I said, whereas before we didn't have, you know, funding or grants that would provide this type of service, you know, now it's here. More mental health professionals and awareness, more information. Like I always like to tell the caregivers and families that I work with, it's you know, the more information you have, the more power to you, you know, whether that's to know your options, make informed decisions for you and your family and your children. And also, again, remove the stigma, remove the fear of whatever holds them back from even getting the services or reaching out for services. Another thing that I think is working is just the overall resiliency in communities. You know, I have to give people credit, you know, in terms of, despite everything that we've been through in the last, you know, 3 to 4 years, people are resilient. People, you know, do overcome, and, you know, they start to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and then, you know, overcoming situations. Yes, people are still, you know, angry over many things, you know, whether that's still things lingering from and resurfacing from the 2020 election, and, you know, if folks feeling like, you know, they were cheated out of something or not heard. And then here we go again, everything's stirring up again with the upcoming election for next year. So, but yes, I do feel that, you know, certain things are working, especially when it comes to a noticeable increase in resources, as well as a decrease in the stigma. Like I said, in our community, in our culture, getting help for mental health, you know, you just don't do that. Those are things that either you don't talk about, you deal with it at home. So that has definitely changed noticeably in our area. And so that is something that I feel is working in our favor, and will continue to work in our favor as we continue to do this work, and as we continue to fight for more resources. Like Angela said, whether that's, you know, got to change some policies, got to bring more funding to the areas that need it, especially, yes, for teachers, for educators, for other types of professionals that do very hard work and aren't feeling the support for the hard work that they do. So again, that's what I feel is working in our area. But there's a lot of work still needs to be done.
Yeah. Thank you, Juanita. And again, you know, just that piece of empowering voice, right? And the awareness of families and providers, who are many mirroring the same issues that the families are facing. Yes, as what's working. Dawn, I'm actually, Dawn, and then Christina, in terms of any other thoughts in terms of what's working. You've elevated some in your previous sharings, but would love to hear if there's other thoughts that you had in terms of what's working.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, I think very similarly, I was, you know, thinking about when I was, you know, doing consultation from that perspective, and also, you know, just the multiple pandemics, endemics that are happening, and how the world's continuing to change. But But what's working, I think, just from being a consultant, taking care of yourself is a big part of it as a consultant. You know, there's, even if, maybe no one ever got COVID in your family, or even if, you've been really safe, or, there's still this tension and energy, I think, that, a collective number of people feel in a community, in a building, like a center, in a group, like maybe a group of home visitors. There's this unseen energy that we know is out there, right? There's the sun, there's the wind, can't really kind of see it, but it's there. And and consultants and helpers, whether you're healthcare, whether you're a mental health consultant, whether you're a mental health therapist, I mean, if you're a helper to human beings, whether young or old, it is heavy work now. It is hard work now. So really digging into the consultative stance, and am I assuming something? I need to step back. I need to slow down. I need to wonder more. I need to, hold others, perspectives. Yes, hold my own, but also make space and hold others' perspectives. Create the space to hold their perspectives. And I, just thinking about something that has been helpful for me is really, like I said, leaning into culture. I leaned in more to my culture, even more at the beginning of the pandemic, during the pandemic, and now, to pull, from spiritual strength for me in my culture. And so much of it is similar to the consultative stance in the way that traditional culture is taught in Navajo. And the other part that I think very similar to what others shared is Navajo Nation used to be, well, we are still really isolated, like many other funding streams in the country, right? But all of a sudden, there's these wonderful teams of First Things First in Arizona, the staff there, and the Navajo Project Island staff. They, said there are all these services and things coming in for, children and adults, but there was no diapers, there was no formula. So they said, we're going to target, prenatal to 5 years old. And so they started this, system of running things out to families, huge area, the size of West Virginia. Driving, all the time, all this volunteering hours and sending out stuff. But from this group, they decided, when it got a little less urgent as far as supplies and things, they decided, let's focus on infant and early childhood mental health. Let's push this out there. And this group still meets every month. Big number of people that come together. They meet virtually, and now they're starting to do in person. But so valuable what's, moving forward, what's working and what continues to work, but really showing up for yourself and then showing up for others. So important.
Oh, I love that, Dawn. I'm just getting chills with what you all are saying. And Christina, you're gonna help us kind of bring this bow on this conversation about like what's working. Would love to hear your sharings as well, what you're thinking.
Well, thank you. I think this webinar is working. I mean, it started in 2020, and I got invited in the second batch of the training, and I think it really has changed how we operate in the world. Really, before 2020, I didn't know how to operate Zoom. I hated webinars, but that's like what I do every day. So it's part of life. And I think the advantage is we actually can reach parents easier at the childcare level because parents are busy running in, running out. And to have a parents meeting, or especially parents group or family childcare providers group, a lot more participation when it is not in person. They don't have to take 3 buses to get there right after work and have to worry about cooking dinner. So that's a positive thing. And of course, I would love to see you guys in person and see your whole body and have the side conversation after the webinar, but we can't. And so that's a drawback of having a Zoom meeting, that you don't get the human connection. And I think that's what happened in 2020. That's like Angela said, a lot of the providers have left the field too because of the low pay, and they don't want to get COVID from the kids and bring it back to the family. A lot of people have left the field. And mental health professional went to grad school online, and they learn how to see clients online. So when they come back to life, they don't know how to deal with crisis. Because you turn off the camera, it's done. So now grad school is beginning to be in person, and practicum training beginning to be in person. They get to learn how to deal with things that are not just within the sessions. So that's exciting. And it's still a journey that these young people have to unlearn being on screen for 8 hours and actually be in place that they are not comfortable with and learn how to be comfortable. But I'm hopeful that in person, it's still and a major way of engaging human beings. Body language is 80% of the communication, so it still need to be in person. And I'm excited that there are more people going back to school, and we are training trainees and interns in person and learning how to deal with human beings in person. And schools are in person, and we are working with the kids about how to be in the space with each other. Mental health has been, I think it's not only the pandemic, it's really from Affordable Care Act that mental health is part of health insurance, which is it's really changed the landscape of how mental health has been treated in the last decade since really the Obama administration. And we are still struggling to catch up with workforce to provide mental health services, and hopefully it will continue to catch up with more providers, especially people of color, immigrant who are bilingual, trilingual, who can help the underserved with the culture and the language that they are comfortable with. That is still a continued effort to move towards, to have more bilingual, multicultural, bicultural mental health providers to match the communities that we serve, to provide the services so that they can feel comfortable to receive the service. And seeing somebody that look like them and understand where they come from. Yeah, so I think back to hope, it may be, we may need to go back to the individual success, because looking at the world, it's really, really scary. Even looking at San Francisco, it's what we hear in the news, is very discouraging. But I think we need to focus back into the classroom, into the individual one-on-one interaction, that when a child had separation anxiety and cry for a month, when the parents leave the child in the childcare, stop crying and actually start enjoying being in the preschool and starting to play with other kids. I think that's something that we have to hold on to at that level. And somebody who doesn't know how to play with another kid, or brings the stress that they experience at home to the preschool, and they feel safe and contained and trust the teachers, that's something that we need to hold on to.
Yeah, thank you, Christina. My gosh, I'm just I don't know why I feel emotional at this moment. I think it's something you said about, the conversation. And when we started this webinar, 5-part webinar series in 2020, we had no idea where it would bring the conversation. And we love that y'all had such a resounding, you as participants, as resounding response to it, continue to listen to it, but so much that y'all have shared about what we've learned. And just something I want to raise before we have our final question to you, panelists, but just as a thinking something we have to remember is that, and I think many of you have raised this, right, that our children during the time of isolation were in their homes with their families. Not every situation is always the most pleasant, but for many children, they were engulfed and surrounded within their own culture. And so that is a wonderful opportunity, the children and their families to be able to engage in that, right? So there was healing there for families as they came together. And then the other part about just being able to accept ourselves and each other and honor our humanity. We all, in our full humanity, want to be able to be validated, wanted to be able to be seen. And so I love how your comments had connected to all of that, right? The last question that we want to ask you all as panelists, and I wish that we had more time, like you said, Christina, that we could just join in and over a cup of coffee or something, right? Continue our dialogue, but we might be able to at another time. But I'd love to ask you this piece. We talked about the consultative stance. We talked about the importance of that stance. Angela, you elevated it. Many of you referred to it. Dawn, you talked about that, right? And one of the stances is about this idea of holding hope. So, we can lose hope in the face of crisis and persistence challenge, right? In this midst of what we're experiencing, like we said, we are reliving this racial unrest. We're reliving it. It's not new. The structural and historical systems of that have created barriers have been there. So we're reliving them. They're not new. But in the midst of all of this, the consultant must maintain belief in change, right? Belief in the change in the system. Be reflective of that for themselves, but also be optimistic to help their consultees and providers to be able to do the same. So I'm asking you all, what are your comments and your thoughts about how we, in our practice of mental health consultation, can be able to hold hope for the future for our providers, our children, our families, and ourselves? And I think I'll start, Angela, I'll just start with you, and then I'll flip around to folks to get some final thoughts. And then after, just want to say, we also want to pose a question to you as participants. So we're going to have an opportunity for you to answer the same question. So be thinking as you're listening to others share their responses.
So Lisa, it can be a tough question to answer, right? Because for the reasons you said, we're living through some very stressful times. And so what enables me to hold hope is this webinar and this conference with its equity theme gives me hope, but also reminding myself that change is slow, can be slow, and can be, often is slower than we would like, but we are always planting seeds. And whether those seeds grow into something is unknown. However, I have seen countless instances and heard stories from consultants that I supervise, countless stories of teachers or children who did not appear to be moving at all. And then one day things are different. Or one day a teacher says something. We had a teacher who the consultant just knew. So a younger white consultant with an older African American teacher. And she would go into the classroom and the teacher just really did not feel very welcoming or inviting. And one day towards the end of the consultation period, she went in just to check in, and she said, I noticed that you park on the street. My car looks like this. If you want to park behind me, I'm not leaving, so you can just park behind my car. And she sat down and rocked babies with her for a little while. And that just meant so much to her that she really had forged a relationship with this teacher, and she had no idea that it was happening as it was happening. So those sorts of stories just give me so much hope to know that little by little, even when we don't think we're making a difference, we are.
Beautiful. Thank you. Seeds that we plant, and we have to give them time to grow. I love that. Love that, Angela. San Juanita?
Yes, for me, what I hold dear and what keeps me holding on to hope is all the work that has already been done, and how there are so many folks that are so passionate about change and this work. And so that allows me to hold on to hope, keeps me motivated, keeps me energetic to continue doing the work. And yes, it's also individual stories like what Angela mentioned, those moments where you just see those human connections, people being compassionate and kind, despite everything that surround us, all of the negative and scary things, everything on the news. So despite all that, when you have those moments, of a teacher just, taking the time to be very, compassionate to a child and guiding the child and embracing the child and understanding, that they cry every day at drop off, and just being very patient. It's those things that allow me to hold on to hope. Our program has a very, very cemented partnership with Head Start. Head Start is one of our greatest partners. And so I see these things all the time. Some of these teachers have been doing this work 20 plus years, and they don't give up, despite sometimes the work conditions or the times, dealing with children, again, post-pandemic, very, very difficult work, very challenging work. And so, but when I see them work with the child and them not, giving up, not resigning, because, yes, we do hear those stories of those who have, but that allows me to hold on to hope and to continue doing this work. And, again, and in mentioning partnerships, just the fact that we, continue to make partnerships with other providers in the community, to be able to expand the work, to speak the same language, in terms of the work that needs to be done. What are the gaps in services and needs? Again, that allows me to continue holding on to a lot of hope in terms of what can possibly change and improve in our communities. And then, of course, getting together like this. Yes, Christina, I agree. An in-person meeting is long overdue. But even gatherings such as this, I mean, there's 500 plus people connected right now. So that's, 500 plus folks that hopefully will be impacted and inspired and changed by what they will hear throughout these next 3 days. And so all of that put together allows me to hold on to hope and to the possibilities of what is out there. Because there's a lot of opportunity. We just have to, again, do the hard work. It's not easy work. Accepting that is step number one. And so again, thank you so much for this opportunity, because it's activities and events like this that allow those of us who are, doing the work day to day to remain optimistic and continue looking forward to the future.
Thank you so much, and Juanita. I'm just overwhelmed. This is so great. Dawn, would love to hear your thoughts about holding hope, and then Christina, holding hope.
Yeah, I'll just share really quickly, just as you all were talking, and just reminded me, sometimes I share this in other trainings or talks I've done. It's just, where do we find the opportunities? And where I've found opportunities, I guess, in my own life and thinking about it, you know, little self-disclosure, professional self-disclosure here, is when I've had the most struggles, I've found the resilience within myself, that way to just keep showing up. And I've seen, you know, so I've worked hard to understand that for myself. And it made it easier for me to see it in other families, in other teachers, and other directors and centers. I look at what challenges do they share with me? I look at that and I see the opportunities. So, you know, kind of like holding, yes, the trauma with resilience, holding the tough things with the good things. It's there. We just have to find it. We have to amplify it. So I just want to share that part of holding hope. And, you know, of course, holding hope is key and central to Navajo culture. We have a saying that we do at the end of prayers. It's Hajona Hastli. And what that means is it is all returned to beauty and balance again.
That's beautiful. I hope you folks wrote that one down. I love that, Dawn. Wonderful way to remember being able to hold that trauma and the hope together. And Christina will put a bow on this for us about holding hope.
I think the idea of equity is relatively new. And I think just even having the concept of equity, and how we advocate for that. And as immigrant families, most immigrants come to this country in hope for the next generation. So we, with mental health consultation for both the providers and the families, but with the lens on the next generation, it's holding hope that they would do better. They would understand equity better. They would make friends with other people and a better understanding than us.
It's beautiful. Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, San Juanita and Angela. I don't know about y'all and as participants, but if you're goosebumps and are not moving, and if you're not feeling something, I certainly am from all of what was shared. We would love to open up to you all, our participants, to ask you that same question. You all are doing this work. How are you holding hope? What ways, right, are you holding hope for the future, for yourselves, for providers, for children, and for families? We have a Padlet that we are going to share on our screen. We'll also put the link and share that with all of you to ask you that same question and give you an opportunity to answer in the Padlet. If you click down to the bottom there, right, you'll see a little plus sign, and then you can enter in your comments. And then when you push publish, it'll pop up in the Padlet. We see some folks who are getting ready to pop in and add their thoughts, but we will keep this Padlet open throughout the rest of the conference because this is just the beginning. But as I think we've talked about, San Juanita said, and Dawn and Christina and Angela have all echoed, this is a journey. This is a journey. We don't arrive at done in this work. We continually learn and unlearn. So love to hear what you're thinking about in ways that you are holding hope for providers, for children and families, and ourselves. So we just take a few moments to do that before we close out. And I love it. I see someone just said, our team gives me hope. You are all so good and so committed to our work in the early childhood community. Love that. Love that. Love that. Yeah. And others are beginning to pop in and think about ways that they are holding hope. And I loved that. It just makes me think about what I think it was, what you may have said, Juanita or Dawn talked about the resiliency in people, like the resiliency that we have in each other, the resiliency we see in our families, the resiliency in our children, right? Here someone says, I'm hoping that we can still, whoop, here they all come. They come fast, right? I'm hoping we can still take care of ourselves so that we can take care of each other. Dawn, you had talked about that, about this, the hard work and the heavy work of equity and the work of mental health in mental health consultation, and how we have to do that. We have to do both. Anything that is resonating for any of the panelists that you're seeing here in the Padlet?
At least children are such a beautiful reminder of hope.
Yeah.
I could not agree with that more.
Yeah, that was one that stuck out for me too. I'm writing that one down so I can keep that. It's going to be right on my screen so I can keep that in my heart. Yeah, truth seekers. I am encouraged that educators are so open to hear and pivot based on the truths that are more readily available. Yeah.
We must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope. Martin Luther King Jr.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Compassion, empathy, love, and optimism that exists in our humanity and can be shared with others. It's a great Monday starter, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Giving voice, someone else said. Yeah. And I think you spoke to that, Juanita, just in terms of helping families and providers to know that they are empowered, right? And that all of us do within our own sense of agency, within our spheres of influence, can make a difference. Yeah. It's beautiful. Anything else? Anyone, any panelists want to pop in to just talk about anything that they're seeing on the screen? And you can, it's great with Padlet, you can add photos. We will keep this open through the remainder of the conference. That will encourage us all, and somehow we'll be able to share with all the participants in some way. I'm putting that out there, don't know how to make that happen, but I'm sure we can. As you're continuing to put things into the chat, we just want to leave you all with just this quote that came from remarks from Associate Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, and it was really made on the 60th anniversary of the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing. And her comments came on September 13th. And she said, which I think is a nice way to leave you all here as you're getting ready to go to the rest of the conference here, that the people of this country have seen challenging times before, and still we rise. We will link arms and step forward together, past the hate, past the fear, and beyond the darkness of division, knowing what we've been through will only embolden us to lift us higher, higher the torch of freedom and fairness and justice and equality and humanity and love and grace. And we leave that with you all to take with us as we remember we come together collectively to have conversation and build our understanding in the work that we're doing in infant and early childhood mental health consultation to really advance equity for our children, our families, our providers, and ourselves. We thank you for the time that you've taken this morning or this afternoon for this plenary session. Thank you, panelists, Dawn, Christina, Juanita, and Angela, my sisters. Thank you all for the work that you do, and have an excellent day and a great rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all for joining.